All right, so you're ready for some silly Christmas riddles? Okay. You may not know Santa has a dog. Do you know what Santa's dog's name is? Santa Paws. Okay. What kind of motorcycle does Santa ride? Holly Davidson. Holly Davidson. What did Adam say the day before Christmas? Adam. It's Christmas Eve, yeah. That's good. Okay. What do sheep say to each other at Christmas time? Say to each other at Christmas time?
Feliz Navidad.
No, that was close. We had that one before. No, Merry Christmas to you. Okay, and finally, it's also sheep. What do sheep say to shepherds at Christmas time? What do sheep say to shepherds at Christmas time? Seasons, bleedings. Bleatings. Seasons, bleedings. That's good. That was bad. Okay. And then I've shared this story before. That kind of leads into the idea of gift giving and that's the best gifts of all. A little story about a woman a grandmother who was making out cards for grandchildren, nieces, nephews, things like that. And you know, the gift buying can get difficult over the years, and just decided to send checks. Going to put checks in cards, you know, and instead of trying to buy gifts and everything. And so in every card she just wrote, "Buy your own gift this year. Buy your own gift," and you know, and it's going to give everybody checks. Well, holidays went past, and to her surprise, she didn't hear from anybody. She didn't get a single thank you from anybody. Was very surprised, and then she was just kind of sitting morosely at her desk, flipping through things, and there she found that stack of checks right there in her water. Didn't quite work out. The checks didn't get in there, and everybody got a card that just said, "Buy your own gift." Not very nice. Well, this is the season of gift buying and wrapping, and I bet, like, there's others like me, it can struggle with it a little bit. It can get difficult. It can get confusing. It doesn't really have anything to do with the expense. It can just get kind of a little burdensome figuring it out. What kind of gifts to get? What are the best gifts? We can get ourselves a little stressed about it for sure in this season. I was remembering a story circulated widely several years back about a teacher in Africa, some country in Africa. She was doing some mission work, some teaching there with the children, and around the holiday season, one of the little boys brought her a beautiful seashell, and she said, "This is just a beautiful shell. Where did you find such a gorgeous shell?" And he said, named a certain place, a bay several miles away. And she said, "Oh my goodness, well, it's just beautiful, but you shouldn't have gone so far to get a gift for me." And he said, "Long walk, part of gift." Long walk, part of gift. I like that. And I think that leads nicely into probably the core truth about gift giving in the Christmas season. It's not really the gift itself, it's the love that fuels it. It's the love that fuels the gift, the effort, the long walk, the heart, the heartfulness. That's really the quality of the gift that makes it valuable, that makes it precious to us. You know, kind of like the wise men's gifts. There are gifts in the gospel stories of nativity, and frankincense and myrrh and gold, valuable things, of course. But the bigger gift was the devotion and the long journey, and the prophecy and the paying of honor and tribute to the child. The greatest gifts have little to do with cost, and we all know that from experience. And I bet we could all name lots of examples of the most precious gifts that we've experienced in our lives that just didn't cost anything or next to nothing. I remember very vividly of Christmases long past, for instance, my mother's wonderful handmade crocheted slippers. We all had them year after year. You're all nodding, you remember the slippers. It was a very common style. And crocheted scarves. I always had a scarf that my mother made as a girl, and these were common gifts under the tree at Christmas time, slippers and scarves. I remember one year my brother came home from college at OU, unexpectedly brought a couple of fraternity brothers with him for Christmas. And oh my goodness, what to do about gifts for those two young men. And my mother managed to polish off a couple of quick pair of slippers, wrap them and get them under the tree. And they loved, it was sweet to see them unwrap those handmade slippers. They loved them. And I tell you, I would love to have some of those hand crocheted slippers now. My mother's been gone some 28 years and I still remember them as a very special gift. I think you know, I've shared before, most of you know, my mother owned and operated a beauty salon for many, many years. I kind of grew up in one. And Christmas time at Danielle Beauty Salon was a good time. It was like a daily party. Everyone was bringing things in. I'm not sure whether salons are the same way now, but in a small town, it's a place, I mean, it's a center of community activity. There weren't any men in those days. It was all women and daughters, mothers and daughters and women, but there was a big influx of gift giving. Everybody bringing in things to share. Certainly lots of cookies and fudge and candies. I remember especially these handmade hard candies that were very common in that area. Very interesting colors, all kinds of colors. They really looked like sea glass. Didn't they? Do you remember what I'm talking about? And they look very beautiful in bowls, these little sea glass candies that you could probably break a tooth on sometimes, but they were pretty. They were very festive, wonderful colors, like a bowl of ornaments. There were a lot of those, and a lot of exchanging of gifts in this season. And I'm not sure why. The impulse is love. It's community love. It's friend love. It's like I want to share in this wonderful season with my neighbors and friends. Some of the gifts that I have to share: my cooking, my baking, my candy making, my snack. Remember the Chex Mix stuff? Yeah. That was always around. Lots of that. Snacks made out of cereal. I remember those fondly. A lot of that in this season. Has little to do with cost, any of it. These precious gifts we remember. I have on my tree, I put on it every year, this little gift wrapped box. It's got a little note on it. It's a nicely wrapped little box. And I just use it as a Christmas tree ornament. And it was given to me by a woman named Vera, who was a hospice patient I visited in the early 90s. So I've been doing this a long time. In the early 90s, she was in the final stages of lung cancer. And I was a hospice volunteer and would just visit her 2 or 3 times a week. She lived in the German Village area, and over a period of a few months we got to know each other pretty well. She taught me how to make her wonderful vegetable soup. I drove her around places, we talked. It was, you know, a difficult time, and we just shared some precious time, you know, during that period. And it was holiday time. She gave me this little Christmas gift. And there's a little tag on it that says, I'm never to open it, but there's all her love inside, now and always. And it hangs on my tree every year. Vera's gift to me. No cost, no object really, just a wrapped box. What a beautiful gift. Remembered really for always. Those are the best kind. It's the love that fuels it, the love behind it that makes the gift worthwhile. It's a helpful thing to remember in this season where there's so much materialist pressure and materialist influence around us. And really the best gifts, I think, have to do with being present with one another, with presence, with that energy of being present, really seeing someone, and really celebrating the presence you've shared, being present with one another, as Vera did with her gift. And that's something that's important to remember this time of year too, where sometimes our sense of connections gets a little watered down in social media days, you know, with maybe 1,000 friends, but who really sees you, who really knows you, who's really present with you, who can you really call upon when you have something important to share. It's the presence. It's that energy of being present with and seeing and accepting with one another that makes for the truest and best gifts. So remembering another story I read about Mr. Rogers recently. You probably all remember Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I think that movie is still in the works with, I think it's going to be Tom Hanks in it, so it's kind of still out there. And that's why there's been a lot of media stuff and a lot of biographical stuff coming out about Mr. Rogers' life. And his whole, unique TV ministry with children was really all about seeing and accepting everyone and making everyone feel that loving acceptance, even the difficult people. Remember, there was always like a difficult person, and would shift who that was, but the difficult people were always accepted and listened to, and always remained a part of the community. People took turns being the difficult person, I think, but the lesson was always, we're all fine just as we are. There's some biographical stuff about where he got that. He was named for his grandfather, Fred, who he had a special connection with, and his grandfather, Fred, would always say, "I love you just the way you are, Freddie. You make this day special just by being you." And that's pretty much what he told all the kids who watched his show. Pretty amazing. And he really walked that talk in his life so beautifully. One of the little biographical things I read was a reminiscence by a young woman named Lisa. Not a young woman now, but at the time she worked as an intern on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for the PBS station that aired that show. And she got to work closely with Mr. Rogers in that era, and remembers really, really fondly some of the experiences they had. And one of them she shared was, and it was kind of around holiday time, she accompanied Mr. Rogers to a dinner at an executive producer for the show at his wife's home. And they went by limo, and Mr. Rogers and Lisa in the back of it, and just the limo driver in front. His name was Billy. And they chatted on the way to the dinner a little bit, got to know, from the back seat, talking with Billy and talking with one another. So they get to the executive's house. I think this is in the Philly area. And Billy says, "Well, when should I come back for you?" And Mr. Rogers says, "Well, where are you going? Come on in." So they all go into dinner. The executive's wife is a little surprised, but puts another plate on the table, and they have a lovely dinner. And then they, later on, when it's time to leave, they leave, and Fred Rogers decides to sit up front with Billy so they could talk more on their way back. And then he finds out that they're going to be going right by Billy's parents' house. And so Mr. Rogers says, "Well, let's stop. I'd love to meet him." So the limo pulls up in this kind of regular middle-class neighborhood somewhere in South Philly or something. And they go up to the door to meet Billy's parents and open the door. And I just love this part of the story. Billy's father comes down the stairs in his bathrobe with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth and says, "Holy sheep dip, it's Mr. Rogers." I said sheep dip in the bio. I don't know what he actually said, but that's what the reminiscence said. Can you imagine Mr. Rogers showing up at your house in the Christmas season? So cookies are brought out. The neighbors are invited over so they can meet Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers plays the piano, and there's singing, and everyone remembers that evening for years thereafter as this very, very special gift. Hosted really by this presence, this energy in Mr. Rogers that just was able to love and accept everybody. Didn't see any distinctions or any boundaries or any divisions. It's very much the love that Jesus taught, right? That radical, all-inclusive love that Jesus taught that we are still wrapping our minds and hearts around to this day. He loved all without exception, all nationalities, all ethnicities, all social classes, all genders. He had women among his disciples, which was unheard of in that era. The socially disenfranchised, like the Samaritans. The mentally ill, like a crazy man they chained up in a graveyard. The lepers, which was anybody with anything that showed on their skin was a leper and was considered unclean. Everybody. He loved and accepted everybody, just like Mr. Rogers. He accepted and loved them just as they were. What a high standard that is. But what an important thing to remember, I think, in this Christmas season. It's that kind of love, to whatever degree we can manage it. That kind of love that fuels all the best gifts. That's what's behind the best gifts. And quite often, the best gifts aren't things at all. They're just expressions. They're tokens of our love. They're gestures. They're ways of sharing and being present with another. I think that's helpful to me anyway, to remember in this season where there's so much pressure on the stuff and getting it right, getting the right gifts at the right time. Maybe it's not an object at all that's needed. Maybe it's just a way of expressing your loving acceptance of another in your life, or for ourselves. The best gifts of all are always those of love. Giving from the heart, all my gifts are holy and precious. It's my affirmation for this gift-giving week. I'll say it once more. Giving from the heart, all my gifts are holy and precious. Together? Giving from the heart, all my gifts are holy and precious. Let's take that into prayer for a moment. Affirm that truth within. Whatever gifts we choose, purchase, find, discover, and share with one another, love is at the heart of them. They are all fueled by love, motivated by love, shared as love. How grateful we are that this deep wellspring of God love within us is bottomless, guides us moment by moment, day by day, to share what's ours to share with our loved ones, our community, our world. And as we do that, we deepen the love in our world. We expand it, and it heals and uplifts and guides us. How grateful we are for that abiding love of God within. And so it is. Amen.